Hello, beautiful people. My name is Vendi, and today we're going to be talking about a topic that is probably as old as BookTube itself, and that is the question, what, if anything, do authors owe their readers? Originally, what I wanted to be sitting down and filming for you guys today was a review of the Nightmareverse trilogy by Elle McKinney, but because of 1,000,001 life things kind of getting in the way, I have not yet finished A Crown So Cursed, the concluding book of the trilogy. I do love that series, so that is a video that will be coming to you guys very, very shortly, but in service of actually getting something out on my upload schedule, and in order to make sure that I actually have time to read these books and create that review, this video is going to be relatively short and sweet. I don't intend to give any sort of definitive answer as to this question. Obviously, it's one that has been repeating for as long as I've been aware of the bookish internet. But if the denizens of book talk can rehash topics and rehash books that were popular on BookTube like 5-10 years ago and act as though they are brand new, I think I'm allowed to revisit a topic that has sort of been weighing on my mind more and more recently. If you follow any one of the myriad book drama channels here on BookTube, then I'm sure you were aware of all of the stuff going on in the community, ranging from things like Patrick Rothfuss still not releasing the chapter that he had promised to read out loud for charity and that he raised many thousands of dollars for, to the many fans who've been waiting for anything, any sign of the conclusion of his Kingkiller Chronicles series, to would-be debut author Kate Corain, one-star review bombing bunch of PSC authors who are also coming out with books around about the same time that they were. And of course, every couple months we get word from George R. R. Martin that he's still hard at work on Winds of Winter, and please everybody stop pestering him about it. As a bookish citizen myself, I also follow all that sort of news, and it got me thinking recently, so what do authors actually owe their readers, if anything at all? It's a question that I've been thinking about for just about as long as I've been on the bookish internet, possibly even before that, and I think my opinion on it has changed. I think I definitely used to be pretty squarely in the camp of, I think that readers are owed some sort of narrative resolution, regardless of how long it takes to get there. So if it's a standalone, I want the story to feel like it's concluded by the time I've finished it. And if there's a trilogy, you better be finishing that last book. The last time a book from the Saga of Ice and Fire saga was released, I was still in high school. And if I'd been waiting with bated breath the entire time, as I was when I first finished reading A Dance of Dragons, I'd have died of suffocation by now, simply because the wait for the next book in the series would have been too long. And in a similar camp, we have Patrick Rothfuss with his continual delaying of A Door of Stone, I believe it's called, the third and final book of the Kingkillers trilogy. Though I confess for that one, I have less personal involvement, having only read the first book and thus not knowing the cliffhanger or whatever the second book ended on a full 10 years ago at this point. That has fans still chomping at the bit and buying little novellas sort of to tide them over until the final book comes out, if it comes out at all. Regardless, as a reader, because I believe that that opinion came from a reader's point of view, I was definitely of the opinion that even a middling or disappointing conclusion is still better than the sort of lack of resolution that a perpetual wait has to offer. Now, however, I'm not so sure that I agree with my former take on this matter. I read a blog post recently wherein the author was discussing this topic themselves, and they mentioned that though they have no strong feelings that an author actually owes their readers a conclusion to a narrative, so the final book in a series or what have you, that the author does in fact owe people some sort of an explanation. And at this point, I think I kind of disagree with that even. Not because I don't feel that readers are owed some sort of resolution to their waiting and their anticipation, because to some degree I still do kind of feel that way, but because I feel like that sort of an attitude, especially given that we exist in an internet age, can get a little slippery slopey and lead to people expecting constant updates about authors' personal lives. What sort of an excuse then counts as an acceptable reason that an author hasn't finished or put out a book in however long it's been since they've put out the previous one? What degree of disclosure about illness or family matters or other personal things do readers then feel that they are owed about this person who ultimately is creating a product to be consumed and is not the product themselves? So I guess as a partial answer to the question at the heart of this video, I feel that authors don't owe anyone any information about their personal life. And I think that that's especially important to remember given that we exist in a digital age, because everything feels so immediately and easily accessible nowadays. And I think it's an important reminder to keep in mind, because due to the immediate accessibility of a lot of information, it's a lot easier, I feel, for people to become entitled to things that really have nothing to do with them at all. You already see sort of slips into this sort of attitude and behavior. Just look at what happened when Celeste Ng asked teachers not to send students emailing, asking her 1,000,001 questions about her books, despite clarifying later on in her tweets that when she does get emails from students, she actually does take the time to respond, regardless of how much it takes away from her writing time. And it is a lot, both the actual physical time it takes to reply to these things and the emotional energy to actually engage meaningfully with the often children who are then emailing her. People still responded with vitriol for her actually putting up a boundary and saying, hey, please don't do this to me anymore. I feel like authors occupy like a weird semi-celebrity space. Like, I feel like no one expects a famous musician or an actor to respond to them immediately. I'm sure some people do, but we kind of agree that the people who do expect that sort of a connection are the weirdos here. Whereas authors, perhaps because they have a sort of smaller subsection of people who actually engage with them as a media personality, I feel like there exists an expectation thusly that they will sort of reciprocate attention and time with their audience, and I don't think that's fair. Again, they are creating the entertainment, they are creating the product. They themselves are not the entertainment or the product. And I feel like oftentimes for a lot of people, those lines get really blurred, and I don't think that it's an okay expectation to make of authors. Another thing I think authors don't owe us is any sort of specific morality, and I do say that with a caveat. In specific, when I talk about this, I mean the morality clauses that are more and more often leaking into agenting and publishing contracts, wherein other people basically dictate to the author that they get to withdraw financial support or whatever based on their perceptions of the author's actions, behaviors, etc. Now, because I am an eternal optimist, I do have to believe that the intent behind such morality clauses came from a good place, and that the idea behind them was to curtail any tremendous amounts of bigotry. But as with almost any other sort of policing in a frankly fundamentally unjust world, my great fear with the introduction of any sort of policing of morality, the ultimate people that this will wind up hurting, the ultimate people who will fall under the most scrutiny, are people who are marginalized themselves, and that these marginalized authors would more than likely be considered to be breaking their morality clauses for actions such as standing up to bigotry, because it could be perceived as bullying behavior or whatever. Now, the caveat comes into play that I think that people owe one another morality, just like we live in a society and we should be good to one another. Like, I think it should be a general rule that people don't, for example, go on hate campaigns against people of color, trying to tank their careers before they even begin, and then when you're caught, blaming it on mental illness. Or donating tens of thousands of dollars to people writing, say, anti-trans legislature, and thus actively harming one of the most marginalized groups. Those are the sorts of actions that I expect all human beings should not be doing, because it is fundamentally unjust as one human being to harm another human being in that sort of way. But, however, I don't think we get to hold just authors as accountable for these things. This is a thing that we should be holding everybody accountable for. So I've talked a lot about what authors don't owe their readers, and as far as an actual answer to this question, I don't know. On the one hand, to quote every 15-year-old Reddit edgelord that ever was and ever will be, nobody actually owes anybody anything. In theory, you can get away with just caring about yourself and always looking out for number one and continuing to live that way and just fuck everybody else. But like, we live in a society. Ultimately, human beings are social animals, and our sort of adherence to the contracts that we make between one another, whether implicit or actively stated, are how we have survived as a species to the point where I get to talk at a camera and make content on the internet as part of my daily routine. The relationships that we form with one another and the trust inherent in those is sort of what makes and breaks our ability to be people, and it has ever since we, lived in caves. And ultimately, I think that's kind of the point. It's not really about who owes who what, it's about the relationships that sort of lead to those questions in the first place. Art is never created in a vacuum. It's a reflection of the person creating it, who is a reflection of the society that they grew up with and the attitudes and stuff echoed around them. So by virtue of creating art, which again is not created in a vacuum, and putting it up for sale, thus engaging with a very literal exchange of good or service for money, authors are sort of tacitly entering into some sort of an agreement, and readers, by providing attention, by providing money, by providing word of mouth to spread the book around, are sort of accepting that deal and are thus kind of primed to, I guess, expect things from it. So no, while authors don't necessarily owe anybody any sort of morality, when they step onto the side of bigotry, their readers are going to notice. And thusly, the authors cannot be all surprised Pikachu face when those readers decide, I don't actually want to associate with this anymore or continue exchanging my money for your goods and services. Because what I expect you to do with that money is actually against what I want my money to go toward. It's not just for entertainment anymore. It's being used to hurt people, and I disagree with that. And that's not bullying. No matter how many books you write where you self-insert as the victim of a bullying campaign from people saying, hey, maybe don't be a bigot, that's not active bullying. That is simply you reneging on an implicit contract with people who trusted you up until now to provide X in exchange for Y, and thus to provide you with Y in exchange for X. In the same way, authors don't necessarily owe you a conclusion to their stories, whether it be the final book of a series, whether it be an ending of a story that you like necessarily well, or even whether it be a book that lives up to the tremendous amounts of hype that have been built up for it by the marketing and publicity teams of that book, or by the author's sort of name and their ability to rest on their laurels, so to speak. However, the lack of story resolution, the lack of quality will rob you of reader goodwill after some time, which again is going to affect your bottom line and your sales. If readers don't trust you to provide what they sort of expect from you and what they believe they are owed because of the contract they entered with you of exchanging their money for your goods and service, your entertainment, your information, whatever they're looking to your books to provide them with. If you don't provide them with that anymore, they're going to withdraw their support. We see the reverse kind of proving the point. So the authors that do communicate, who do provide the book that readers are expecting, who do engage with readers at the very least on their own terms, they develop trust and enthusiasm, and their audiences grow because word of mouth is the best possible sales tool. If your readers are telling other readers, hey, this author constantly delivers and over-delivers and keeps delivering, that's going to draw more people into this pool. I know I've dunked on a lot of authors in this video, but let's talk for a moment about Susan Dennard, who fully never disappoints. The conclusion to her Luminaries trilogy is coming out later this year, and though I haven't read any sort of excerpt that confirms to me already that the book is going to be just as punchy and fast-paced and emotionally cathartic as the rest of the books that she has written have been for me, I trust her as an author enough to promote the upcoming release of this book because I trust her as an author. She consistently provides quality product. She provides it in an incredibly timely fashion and is very communicative about her process throughout the entirety of it. And the ideas reflected in her work of sort of backing the underdog and making the morally right choice match with her online presence and the causes that she supports. Not only do I trust that the books that she is writing are going to work for me and make me happy and deliver on the narrative promises that she has set up in her previous works, I also believe that when I give her money in exchange for my work, it is doing good in the world, giving me a sort of double whammy of happiness whenever I get to support her and buy one of her books. Now, if Susan consistently skipped out on deadlines and didn't give any reasoning or rationale behind why that was happening, or if, for example, she took money from myself and other readers promising an early released chapter of her next work that she was working on and then just never delivered on it, would I feel betrayed on a personal level? I don't think so, just because I don't really do parasocial relationships in that way. I certainly wouldn't send her any sort of vitriolic hate, which, like, if you do that, I don't care how much you want a book to come out or how much you feel personally betrayed by a certain author for a book not being out yet. That's absolutely just a reprehensible thing to do. Again, I feel people owe each other morality and boundaries, and I feel like if you send an author hate for not having released a book, you're a terrible person. Sorry. That said, though, I would feel that she had sort of a little bit reneged the social contract that she created as a creator, not creating, and thus I might be a little more reticent to pre-order a book. I might wait for it to be out before putting money behind it. Luckily for me, given that she is my favorite author, that's never been a problem that I've had to face with her. I get to just be kind of wholeheartedly excited for Susan every time she announces a new book coming out, because when she makes a promise, a narrative promise, she follows through with it and thus continues to reinforce and rebuild a sense of trust between myself as a consumer and herself as a creator of the product that I like to consume. So in conclusion, what, if anything, do authors owe their readers? For me, personally, what I think? Probably nothing. But readers don't owe them anything either. Again, and I have to stress this over and over again because media literacy comprehension rates are absolutely plummeting. The morality of, like, don't dox and harass an author comes into play here, and don't be an active bigot. That comes from being human, not being a reader. Like, don't be a terrible person goes both ways. So because nobody owes anyone anything, We could sort of be at this sort of like Wild West standoff. I'm pointing a gun at you, you're pointing a gun at me, and we're sort of at an impasse type of deal. But to avoid any sort of like negativity and tension and hurt feelings, and anyone going into any sort of relationship like this in open hostility or bad faith, I think both parties, both author and reader, are best served, and the symbiosis between the two is best served if everybody comes to the table with the intent to create a mutual trust and goodwill. Obviously, there's not any sort of formal agreement being signed, but there's a sort of tacit understanding and idea that from the author's point of view, there's this sense of, I will create something that will make you learn more, or something that will make you feel. And from the reader's point of view, then it's like, great. And in turn, I will do my best to love it. And if I do find that I love it, I will share it with those I love so we can build a community together to rally behind you. I realize that I've come to nothing even resembling an actual conclusion. Given that I'd rather spend my time reading than I would sitting here and filming and continuing to wax philosophical about a thing that ultimately has no huge impact on how any of us live our lives, I'm going to go ahead and call it there. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up, and if you like me, maybe consider subscribing to my channel. I post videos every Thursday, and I'd love to have you join my little bookish family. Whether you are a writer or a reader yourself, I'd love to hear your take on what you think authors or readers owe one another. So if you have any specific feelings about this, or even just vibes, please tell me about them in the comment section below. I'm always looking to expand my personal opinions about this topic, and I'd love to engage with you there. Or if leaving a full comment is too much for you right now, that's totally okay. Just leave me a open book emoji to let me know that you got to the end of this video. But regardless, that is it for me. Thank you guys again so much for watching this video, and I'll see you with the next one very soon. Goodbye.